Adventure Park USA is a family-owned, Wild West-themed amusement park and family entertainment center located in Monrovia, Maryland. It's located about 50 minutes from Baltimore without traffic and an hour from DC, and a little over an hour from Six Flags America. There they have some mini bowling, an arcade, laser tag, a ropes course, mini golf, and some flat rides. But then they have two somewhat major roller coasters. I have been to the park many times, especially when I was younger, to do the arcade and mini golf, but I had actually not ridden the coasters until National Roller Coaster Day 2020, where I broke my 9-month coaster drought and got 2 new credits. First, there's Wildcat, which is a Schwarzkopf Wildcat that has certainly been around. It originally opened in 1976 as Die Wildkatze at Busch Gardens Williamsburg. It operated for 8 seasons, closing after 1983. Then it was moved to Rye Playland Park, where the name was translated to English, Wildcat, and it operated for another 8 seasons, this time closing in 1991. Then it moved to Steel Pier in Atlantic City, where it operated for 6 seasons, closing after the 1999 season. After that closure, another park decided to give it a shot, this one being Williams Grove Amusement Park. This time it only lasted 5 years, closing in 2005 with the rest of the park. 2005 was also the year that Adventure Park originally opened, and they were in the market to purchase the coaster as the owner had wanted to run one for his whole life. For that reason, they bought the used and bruised Wildcat, fixed it up a bit, and opened it for the 2007 season. It's basically a traveling coaster at this point, but I do have a feeling that Adventure Park will be its final home. As for the stats, it travels a little under 40 miles per hour, the ride is 44.3 feet tall and is 1,509.2 feet long. It is also very compact as the footprint is only 177.2 by 65.6 feet. There are other major coasters, Wild West Express. This is a Zamperla windstorm that is also a relocation, and it was actually the only Zamperla windstorm ever. The model is very similar to the SDC Hurricane though, and it even uses trains from SDC. It originally opened in 1997 at Old Town in Kissimmee, Florida. It then operated until 2014 when the park closed both their coasters, the other being a Wacky Worm, and Windstorm was sent to Adventure Park. It was rebuilt and renamed Wild West Express. I actually got to witness the construction of this as I passed by the place on the interstate relatively frequently, so that was interesting. But to the stats, it is 53 feet tall, so the tallest coaster in the park, has a 30-foot drop, it's 40 miles per hour, is 1,430 feet long, and has trains that seat 12 people. Oh, and also, the park has a miler kiddie coaster named Tumbleweed, I should mention, but we're mostly going to be talking about Wild West Express and Wildcat. But before we get to my actual opinions, I should mention how they're handling COVID in case you're considering visiting and want to know. In terms of the mask policy, you must wear one while inside the main building where you purchase your tickets and can do various things like arcade games I mentioned earlier. People followed these rules pretty well as almost everyone was wearing a mask. I only saw a few little kids not wearing one, but that's to be expected because they don't know better. Everyone over the age of 10 was following the mask policy from what I saw. Outdoors, though, was somewhat of a different story. From the information I gathered, masks were optional in the outdoor park if you could social distance, but I would say that around 75% of the guests outdoors were wearing masks. Every employee I saw was also wearing one both indoors and outdoors, except for the tilt-a-whirl operator who would take his mask off while the ride was running, but then put it back on when dealing with guests. I personally opted not to wear one when I was playing mini golf because it's isolated from most of the park, and there was absolutely no one near us, plus it was outdoors and hot out. But I did wear my mask when I went into the rides portion of the park, and of course when I was indoors. There are also various hand washing and hand sanitizer stations scattered throughout the park, both indoors and outdoors, and man, that hand sanitizer smelled good. In terms of social distancing, the park was getting enough people to be profitable, but there also weren't so many people that you couldn't space out. I had no trouble at all, and it seemed like the people weren't idiots, as I'm not sure I saw any issues once with social distancing when I was there. Also, every other row was closed on Wild West Express, and they were only doing one party at a time on Wildcat. Plus, they were sanitizing each vehicle after someone used it, and overall, I think they were doing a great job, and I definitely felt safe. And now that I'm done rambling about the background information and COVID situation, I'm going to give my actual opinions of the rides, starting with Wildcat. Let's start with the first thing that you noticed, and that's the presentation. I would say that it's mediocre. There's good parts and bad parts that kind of balance it out. The bad is that underneath the ride is just a bunch of rocks and weeds, and I feel like some grass or maybe even landscaping would really help it out. Also, the paint is very noticeably faded these days, and I'm curious if it's even gotten repainted since 2007. However, that doesn't matter too much because of how visually appealing these Schwarzkopf Wildcats can be. It has that cross-tie, almost wooden coaster-like support structure that looks cool and gives some nice near misses. It just all around gives off old school vibes, and I could just sit there watching it go round and round. Also, they situated it in a perfect spot, as when you're in the parking lot, it's situated on top of a platform and has a bunch of kiddie rides surrounding it, so it appears massive even though it's actually pretty small for a coaster. Also, driving into the park is cool as the angle makes it look like just a mess of track and supports. But no matter how a ride looks, it could be a good or bad ride, so let's move on to the ride experience. You start by boarding your vehicle and you can sit in either the front or second row. They both seat 2 riders. I definitely recommend the front as you get that unobstructed view and it's only 2 rows, so the back makes no difference intensity wise. Then you get in and pull down your lap bar and it's just a buzz bar restraint, just one bar that goes across both riders and there's no seatbelt. It doesn't matter a whole ton because there's no airtime, but at least you feel free. Then you take a turnaround and jolt into the chain lift, and be ready because with the hard seat backs, that jolt can mess up your back a little if you're not prepared. The ride op did warn me about this before though, which I definitely appreciated. That's really the only rough patch of the ride though, as somehow, someway, despite being built 5 times before, and operating a park with a budget as low as my coaster count, the ride is butter smooth. Ah, the magic of Schwarzkopf. Anyways, you take a dip into the turnaround that gives you a little bit of speed, and before you know it, you're zooming down that drop, and into what is that? A trim brake? Anyways, it doesn't really matter because you're going to lose most of your speed on that turnaround. Yeah, pacing definitely isn't the strong suit. But what is a strong suit is coming next as you dive down before popping up to another turnaround. But this one has a downward section allowing for you to get some nice laterals, but that's only the start. You take another drop before heading into a turnaround and helix set, you take it at decent speed, and now you are sliding around that no-seat divider train. The strong laterals are definitely my favorite part of the ride. You take another dip into a helix and a half, which again provides some strong laterals, and this I also found to be the most forceful part of the ride. It was nothing gray out level or anything, but I definitely felt some forces there. So that's the ride. You may have noticed a couple places where there are trim brakes, but I found, and this POV shows, that it doesn't really matter as they don't affect the train much, if at all. But another thing that I feel like I should talk about is the operations on this thing. I'm just gonna go out and say that they're pretty poor. Now I understand that it's going to take longer to get the cars out just because of the whole sanitizing thing, but still, they are running one car, just one, on a Sunday when you can only put one party in each 4-person car. And it's not like the ride op could really do anything about it because he was trying his best. The problem is that he was the only operator there and he's probably not trained to handle 2 cars. Now you might say, well, you can't really judge the operations fairly because with the whole COVID situation, they're probably understaffed. But the thing is, I've seen videos of the ride being run before COVID, there's only one operator there. But let me go by the numbers. When I got in line, there were about 15 people in front of me. By the time I got on the ride, I'd waited about 15 minutes. That leads to an absolutely terrible theoretical capacity of 60 people per hour. I just feel like the way the ride is run could be a bit better. But anyways, I'm tired of complaining, so I have to say that I really did enjoy the ride for its laterals and fun low-to-the-ground turns. It currently ranks as my number 57 out of 79 on the ranking of coasters I've ridden, with Pandemonium at Six Flags St. Louis right above it at 56 and Fairly Odd Coaster right below it. So now let's move on to Wild West Express. I'll just go ahead and say that I do prefer Wildcat, but I do still enjoy Wild West Express, and I think that a lot of people will give it too much hate. Let's again start with the presentation. I'm just going to go ahead and say that Wild West Express does not look good. Again, it's just rocks and pavement under the ride, but also I just don't understand the color scheme. It's supposed to be Wild West themed, yet they decided to make it red and blue. But I will say that the colors have held up well as the ride isn't too faded. The trains, however, are a different story. They appear as if they haven't been repainted in 20 years, or maybe they just chose a very unique shade of yellow, it could be either. About the trains though, it's nice that they aren't just one car, as usually it will seat 12 people. I think that that's a perfect number for a park like this. So now let's get into the ride experience. You start by going straight into a lift hill, and there's really nothing to say about this. I guess you get a decent view of the mini golf courses, but that's about it. The drop is unique, I'll say that, and that makes it pretty fun, but most of the ride just consists of a lot of dead sections. However, there are moments and I will highlight those. First, my favorite part of the ride is what I describe as the half inclined loop. I don't know, it's weird, but sitting in the back row, I got absolutely whipped down that drop. Overall, I think the back is definitely the place to be on this thing. Surprisingly enough, I actually found it to be smoother back there, and it provided a much more intense experience. There is sadly no airtime in both the front and the back though. Like I said, it was smoother, but I wouldn't describe anywhere in the train as smooth. It definitely has a very noticeable rattle, but it's not really rough or anything, so it's nothing that will ruin the ride in my opinion. Just make sure that you don't have your head against the headrest. Then you have a helix that does provide some decent G's towards the end, definitely the strong suit of the ride. The next helix though is much better as you take it with more speed and actually get quite close to the ground. That's my second favorite part of the ride, and before you know it, you're headed into the brakes. It's definitely not a long ride, but I wouldn't describe it as short either, and that basically sums up the whole ride. It's not really that good, but it isn't bad. It's just kinda mediocre. but it's still a roller coaster, and I'm a coaster enthusiast, so I enjoyed my experience. In terms of where it ranks, I have it as my number 59 out of 79. Fairly Odd Coaster ranks right above it, and Avatar Airbender right below, both at Nickelodeon Universe Mall of America, funny enough. So there you have it. Adventure Park is a nice little park to spend an hour or two at if you're a coaster enthusiast or if you have little kids. Their coasters aren't the greatest, but they're fun for what they are, and I will definitely be back.